Hi, everyone. Before the episode begins, I just want to remind you to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Marlene the Plant Lady and YouTube, Everything Gardening with Marlene Simon. And remember, please, please, please rate and review on iTunes and Spotify. That just helps the podcast get noticed by more people, and then more people will become better gardeners. And that's what we all want. So enjoy the episode.
Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour, and I'm your host, Marlene. And tonight we are going to talk about birds. A few weeks ago, we talked about the bees. Now we're going to talk about the birds. And I know very little about birds. I know they're very important for the ecosystem. They're very important for your garden. They're beautiful to watch and to listen to, but that is the extent of my knowledge. So good thing I have a bird expert, Tammy Poppie, and I'm jealous of her last name because it's a flower. You are joining me from Wisconsin, where it is, like you said, it's a nice 70 degrees, but you said it's going to be about 0 degrees in a few months. So I should be quiet about my 113 degrees, which it is right now.
Right.
So thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you had your website is on the feeder, onthefeeder.com. Is that
right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So you've been birding, it sounds like, for a good portion, like 25 years or something.
Right. Yeah. Can you believe it?
No,
I can't believe I've been on the earth that long.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, no, I can't believe half the things when I think about that was 20 years ago. What? That was 20. That just seemed like yesterday.
Right.
So did one day you just decide, oh, I'm going to get into birds? Or was it a special moment with a bird? Or did you get dragged along to bird watching? What sort of started this dive into birds?
Yeah. So actually, the exact year was 1999, if you can believe it. And my husband and I had just built a home, and we had all this extra property. And I'm like, oh, let's put out a feeder. So for Christmas, he gave me a bird feeding pole system and a couple of feeders. And I filled them with seed. I had no idea, what I was doing or what kind of seed to use. I think it was some sort of mix. I'm not sure. But I just, put it out, not knowing what to expect. And within a couple of days, they started coming. And it was like amazing. I'm like, wow, I just, put out bird seed and birds are everywhere.
Sorry, so all I pictured was the movie The Birds. Sorry.
That's okay. You're not alone.
I know. Just the way you said that. And they kept coming.
Yeah, to clarify, they came to the feeder. They weren't attacking me.
Okay, now that we've got come on, I had to do a birds joke. We got it out of the way pretty quick. So no more, I promise.
Okay. You totally expected that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so that was, and I thought nothing of it. I just, over the years, just kept, observing the birds in my yard and learning a little bit more about what type of seed to attract certain types of birds. What type of seed wasn't so messy, because what I soon learned was that the mix that I was buying was messy because a lot of birds weren't interested in the filler that was in it. Mm-hmm. And so they would just kick them out of the feeder, and I would just have this yucky, moldy mess on the ground. So I'm like, oh, what do I do about that? So it's just been, trial and error and running into little issues along the way and researching what to do about it. And and that kind of that brought me to about 5 years ago, when I decided to make a big career change, essentially getting out of the corporate world and doing something that I enjoyed. I didn't know what it was at the time, but turns out it's going to be writing about birds. So that's how I started on the blog. But I honestly feel like I have the best job in the world, because I get to learn every day about things that totally interest me. Nothing like a job in the corporate world where you're just kind of dragging it in every day. So, so that's what I do now. I explore things that people want to know about birds, and I learn along the way because a lot of it I never would have thought of before.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How many species, do you have an idea of how many have visited in the past, 25 years to your property?
In 25 years?
Yeah.
Honestly, I would bet there's no more than 20 species that just visited the yard. Not all species are going to come into the yard. Many of them, well, depending on your yard, I suppose. I don't have a wooded yard. If I did, I'd probably attract a lot more. But some species just don't come to, your typical suburban yard. Primarily cardinals. I get a lot of cardinals, bluebirds, all sorts of finches, woodpeckers too, even though we're not in the woods. I have a dead ash tree out front that I won't let my husband take down because the woodpeckers love it so much. It's not great for the neighborhood, but
hey, you have a reason. Maybe you put a sign on it saying this is a home for woodpeckers. We're not removing it. And then all of a sudden you'll become like, oh, wow, she's very aware of the ecosystem and environment,
Right.
Instead of like, man, she's just lazy. She's not getting rid of that tree.
Yeah, I'm sure people drive by. When are they going to cut that thing down?
I imagine not all birds, of course, are going to go to a bird feeder. I mean, there's birds of prey that, like owls that are after small mammals. So the bird feeder is just really attracting the ones that are after seed. Is that correct? Is seed primarily what they're eating?
Yeah, primarily. Nowadays there's all sorts of feeders that will hold even insects, if you can believe it. People are crazy about bluebirds, especially eastern bluebirds that not too long ago were near extinction or getting close to, venturing that way. And people jumped on the bandwagon and just started putting up bluebird houses. And it just became an absolute craze and continues today because they're, kind of the underdog and, cute and fluffy and blue.
And
who wouldn't want one in their yard?
and they put insects in the feeders?
Yeah, some of them will, not go to the extent of getting an actual commercial feeder, but we'll put them in a dish.
Okay.
Mealworms are very popular. In fact, there's whole businesses out there that are, farming mealworms for the purpose of attracting bluebirds.
Got it.
In addition, you could also get dehydrated mealworms, which, if you're trying to attract them to your yard for the first time, they're probably not going to fall for the dehydrated ones.
Yeah.
So you might want to start out with some live ones that are moving around and showing life.
Yeah, something to attract them. So I guess my one question I've always wondered is do they sort of primarily all eat the same? You're saying that the bluebirds eat mealworms, and I'm assuming most birds eat a form of protein as insects, but then they also eat protein in the form of nuts. Is there something that you shouldn't feed? Like, are there mixes in food that if you're trying to attract a certain one that's not good? Or
well, people seem to think they can feed birds all sorts of things, and I mean, I like to keep it natural. If it's not something they're going to find in nature, then you really shouldn't be offering it to them, and they probably won't eat it anyway. Bread.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking with ducks with bread, Wonder Bread.
Yeah, where did that come from? Why did people start throwing bread for birds? It just seems so strange. I've not come across any sort of research that indicated it would be harmful to them. But if you think about birds in general, they're relatively small. I mean, ducks are a little bit bigger, but if they're going to consume food in a certain quantity, it needs to be nutritious for them. And there's really nothing nutritious about bread.
Yeah.
I don't care what kind of bread it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just like to keep it natural. A lot of people will or they swear by putting red food dye in the nectar for hummingbirds.
Mm-hmm.
And again, back to, there hasn't been any conclusive evidence that shows any hummers were harmed by that, but it doesn't benefit them in any way. And it's just not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're attracted to red, but all the feeders out there nowadays have red on them. So that alone should attract them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I've heard too. I never put hummingbird feeders out, but I know there was a big, it's like, don't put dye in it. So
yeah, it's just not necessary. I kind of have a weird story. This place up north Wisconsin, where my husband and I go every summer. There's a woman up there who has hummingbirds by the hundreds, I bet, just swarming around her feeders. She probably has like 5-6 feeders out, and they're all just swarming around. And she said, I'm like, wow, look at all those hummers. And she said, well, it's because of my nectar concoction that I make. It's a family secret. I can't tell you what it is. Well, it was red. Clearly it was red. I nudged her a little bit, and she confessed that it has, what the heck is it? Gosh, I can't remember the name. It's used for mixed drinks. It's like a red.
Oh, grenadine?
Yes, that's exactly it. Grenadine. And I was like,
yeah.
It's I think it may even be high fructose corn syrup based or something.
I literally think it is just sugar and water and red food dye. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty darn sure that's what grenadine is. And then you give it a fancy name.
So, interesting.
Yeah. So I think it is so I don't even think it's cane sugar. I'm sure it's not even cane sugar these days. So you're right. It's not even pure sugar.
Yeah. And that's definitely a no-no is, if you're going to make homemade nectar, it should always be pure white granulated sugar, the stuff we grew up on. Nothing artificial, and nothing with, just pure granulated sugar is really all you need.
Yeah.
And no honey, no syrup, things like that. In fact, I came across a photo once online, and it was a poor hummingbird that its beak was clamped shut because it had consumed honey.
Oh.
Somebody had put honey in the feeder.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Literally can kill them. So it just keep it natural, or better yet, plant some nectar producing flowers, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is hummingbirds, when you think of birds and pollinators, you think of hummingbirds as primarily, and there's so many flowers in the garden that you could plant and maybe supplemental feed them, early spring. But I always say that aloes, not that you just want all aloes, but they're early spring bloomers for us in zone 9. And Wisconsin, you're starting a little bit later. So, do a mix. Maybe if you don't have tons of flowers blooming, you could feed them supplement. But if you give them, grow enough flowers for them, they can make their way. But a lot of people think of birds and they just think of pollinators. But we want to plant our garden for the birds, because you're talking about them eating mealworms and stuff. And a big question this time of year people ask is, the tomato hornworms. And birds go after all different types of worms and insects on your plants. A lot of people don't think of them as natural predators. Yes, they could pull out your little seedlings. They could peck your fruit, but they actually are really good at taking pests out of the garden, eating worms. So we want to make the garden a nice place for them. And with that is planting and doing a few things to encourage them in the garden. So what are some things that people don't often think about? Because I know they just think about, food, but then there's nesting material. Do you provide them water? Like you said, you left an old stump for the woodpeckers. What are some things people could do to encourage and make their garden a little bit better habitat for birds?
Right. Yeah. And honestly, there's a lot of people that don't want to put out feeders. For whatever reason, they think it might attract, mice or raccoons or whatever the case may be. They just don't want to put out feeders. So, planting plants that will actually provide food for the birds is awesome. But then also, as you mentioned, especially, trees and shrubs that are really dense, the deciduous kind that have all sorts of branching going on. Those are awesome for birds for nesting purposes. Most songbirds will nest in a shrub of some sort. I have a lilac upside my kitchen window, and every other year a cardinal pair will nest in there. So, having shrubs and trees available for them to nest in, also for shelter, because, there's birds of prey everywhere. I walk outside my door and, I always see hawks and, I'm not really up on my birds of prey, but all sorts of very large birds kind of just swooping around the neighborhood. So they need places to hide and also shelter when the weather is not great. In Wisconsin here, I don't know how, I know how birds survive winter, but I still find it astonishing when it's 20 below zero that birds are actually surviving out there.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But, we can help out by planting, like dogwoods or any sort of native tree to your area or shrub. And berries. I know that's, another way to feed the birds. But when insects aren't available and throughout fall and winter, berries are really important. And there's so many varieties of native berry producing trees and shrubs. That is really, life sustaining for them in really sub-zero temps.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And something that a lot of people don't think about is, grasses. Some grasses will provide food in the way of grains and things along those lines. But then also they provide a nice nesting material for the birds as well. They have to build their nest out of something. It's usually grasses and twigs and, like a robin will use mud in theirs as well. But any sort of foliage in your yard is helpful for them.
Yeah, because they make all different sorts of nests. So it's not just a one shop. They just go to the nest shop and they buy the same material. So it goes sort of along the lines of trying to keep that ecosystem, and same thing with the native bees and pollinators. You want to clean your garden up, but you don't want to clean it up so much that there's not debris that the birds can't use for themselves. I know right now my sunflowers are pretty much dying down, and I don't harvest the sunflower seeds to eat. There's so many of them. So I either leave them, or even when they're falling over and they're done, I'll just chop them down and leave them on the ground. And then the birds come and pick the sunflowers out of the, when they're laying on the ground. And then I'll take them to the compost bin after most of the seeds have gone away.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, in my mind, I'm thinking, isn't that why you grow sunflowers? I don't know. I guess people eat the sunflowers too. I've never been a fan of sunflower seeds.
Well, I think you grow sunflowers because once you grow them and then you let the seeds fall down on the ground, they just keep growing for you year after year.
They do. Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, whether you like it or not. So no, it's good because you definitely do see the birds going to them, and that always makes me smile. I'm like, okay, good. This is going to good use. And I have I have milkweed plants that I plant for monarchs, but their seeds and their fruits have a lot of cottony material. So I always picture the little birds grabbing onto the little cotton material of the seeds and the seed pods and then bringing them to their nest. Because if I was a bird, that's very soft. It's like silk. So that's what I would use.
Right. So, I would imagine they would use that too.
Yeah. So it's not always a good thing to deadhead your flowers. It's sort of leave some flowers to go to seed, because even if you're I'm trying to prolong blooms on my annuals, let some go to seed. One, because you'll have flowers next year. Two, you'd be surprised what the birds are pecking at to get to.
Right. And sometimes I have to resist, cleaning up my yard. Everything's all dead looking, and with winter approaching. And I just want to clean it up. But it's no, got to leave, the birds need seed. And
Yeah, exactly. And maybe don't prune the shrubs down as far as you're going to. Maybe leave them, like you said, clean them up a bit. But and also another thing I noticed is a lot of birds, and we have quails here, and they seem to just run on the ground. And so don't even lift your shrubs up all the way. Let them grow to the ground, because I think that's sort of a protective. You see them just run into the shrubs, where a lot of people want to clean them up, raise them up so you could see that nice branch structure down below. But having some that are just down to the ground allows them, like you said, to get away from the predatory birds.
Right,
Possibly.
exactly. And yeah, I have a little lesson learned story. Many years ago, in one of my shrubs near the house, it was looking all ragged, and it was springtime. I think it was middle of spring. And I just started hacking away at this thing. And the next thing I know, all of a sudden, I see baby birds in a nest, and I'm like,
no.
oh my God. I just felt horrible. Here I just completely exposed them to the world. So the lesson there is, if you're going to prune your shrubs, do it, while it's still winter.
Okay.
Or after summer, because, you just never know what birds might be nesting in there. And, some birds start earlier in the spring nesting, and other ones, can go as late as August.
So that's
that was a
primarily the
lesson learned
time.
for me.
Okay. So that's primarily the time that you would expect. If another question is, if you see a nest and there's nothing in the nest and it's sort of off season, do some birds, will they come back to the same nest? Because I'm always like, oh, I can't prune that. There's a nest there. Will some birds come back to the nest, the same one, or they always rebuild, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure of, I can't think of any birds that would return to the same nest.
Okay.
In a subsequent year.
Okay.
They may use the same nest that particular, breeding season, but you're talking about after the season's over and you came across the nest,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're pretty safe if it's nothing's in it. It's sort of going into the winter, like the fall, and you're pruning. Assume that they've all vacated. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're pretty safe. Even if you find a nest in, like a birdhouse or some sort of cavity box, if it's still within the season, you still want to remove the nest in that particular case, because with birdhouses, sometimes the birds will just build nests on top of each other inside of there. And what you end up with is, a stack of nests that are closer to the hole than they should be. And certain predators can just reach right in and, snake some babies if they want.
Okay, that's a good point. Okay, so clean them out and then just assume. And I know they could go back to same areas. People like, oh, I had a pair of mourning doves or something going back, but they generally are going to rebuild a nest. Or it was the same season, you're seeing them go back. So they could go back to the same spot, but they're going to rebuild a nest.
Yeah, most birds will, yes.
Okay. Okay, that's good. You're talking about little baby birds, and I follow a few rescue sites, and I've had this happen before where you do find baby birds on the ground. And I know the number one thing is leave it for a bit. I'm always confused by that, because if it fell out from it not being able to fly, I don't think I've ever seen a mommy bird picking up a baby bird in her mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. It depends on the age of the bird, and it's pretty easy to tell. Like you just said, if it's a bird that looks like it fell out and is not mobile, it's not able to hop around or flap its wings in any way, or it looks like it doesn't quite have enough feathers to be out of the nest. I think it's pretty obvious usually, versus, a fledgling usually has all its wings. And they're usually really fluffy because they just have, the downy feathers, cute and fluffy, and they might be able to hop around. Those are the ones you want to leave. You can maybe, keep an eye on them and, make sure that mom comes back within a couple hours. Or you see mom or dad in the area, because they're usually nearby watching them, from a tree or even on the ground. But if it's, if it looks like a nestling or a pretty fresh little baby bird, then you want to see if you can find the nest and, carefully, gently put it back in the nest.
Okay. So if it's not hopping, not downy feathers, not flapping around, it looks like it just fell out, then you could pick it up and try to put it in a nest. And then maybe if not, then bring it to a rescue place.
Right.
Okay. All right. But if it's hopping around, feathers, a lot of times you could hear, there's extra squawking going around. So you're imagining they're communicating somehow.
Right, exactly. They're getting encouragement from mom and dad in the area.
I could just imagine the dad. Come on, fly. When I was your age, I was flying. Come on.
Right.
That's what? I had to fly
I used to fly uphill.
Exactly. Okay. I know that's a big question is someone who is not around okay, so the joke with me is I hate seeing anything suffer. And the other day we had squirrels, a squirrel on the ground. And my first instinct is to tell my husband to shoot it and put it out of its misery. And he's like, Marlene, we're not going to do that. I'm like, I just can't handle the stress of seeing anything suffer, and we could bring it to a rescue place. But so that's why I hate seeing anything. One year, and this surprised me is we had, we don't get nearly as cold as you. So I can't even imagine how birds survive, but I think it's how they're adapted. It warmed up after winter. And then all of a sudden we had a cold spell and there were 4 dead birds below our pine tree. And I looked it up or I was trying to figure something out. And it's almost like they hatched during a warmth spell and then the cold, but I don't know how that's possible.
Were they little? Did they look like babies?
They were little, but I think they were a very large bird species because they looked like they had, the downy fur. They weren't, but they were large. So I couldn't quite figure out. We have I know they weren't hawks, but we have blackbirds and I don't really know my birds especially, but I just remember there were 4 of them down below and they didn't have injuries, like something didn't pick them up. And I think I was asking around and they're like, yeah, it was a severe cold snap and something, or if like the mom doesn't come back in time or, so I was surprised. It was very sad.
Yeah, that would be sad. Yeah. They have to stay warm when they're little. That's why, mom is usually sitting on them.
Yeah. So maybe something happened to the mom and they tried to venture out of the nest and they got hungry and they fell out. It's just horrible.
Yeah, it is. I when I see stuff like that, like I participate in a lot of Facebook groups about, backyard birding and whatnot. And, it breaks your heart to hear some stories, especially people trying to attract bluebirds and trying to be really good bluebird landlords and clean out the birdhouse and whatnot. And occasionally a predator will, wipe out the nest. And it's like, it's awful, but it's nature. I mean, if you think about the circle of life, I mean, whoever the predator was, that's their natural food source. So
yeah,
I guess you got to think about it that way.
I know. I hate the circle of life sometimes. I mean, I love birds. I love birds of prey, but then when I look up and I see this mommy or daddy, chasing this big hawk, I'm like, oh, that's just not good. I mean, if it's scaring it away, good for it. So, we talked about, just not cleaning up the garden, planting berries, native berries. So if you're, it's best for native berries. So the native birds are adapted to eating certain foods, having flowers for, pollinators and leaving pests. Of course, don't use any pesticides, of course.
Right.
I was just saying how I don't like when people use, rat bait, because then you have secondary poisoning from usually birds of prey who are going after the rats and stuff. And so that's not good. But what about water? Is it good to put water out, or is that what are some of the quote rules of putting water out?
Yeah. Actually, water is a great way to attract birds, especially the ones that will not come to a feeder. Most birds will eat bird seed or, fruit or berries or insect, something that's in your yard, but water is like, it'll attract all sorts of species you wouldn't otherwise see. And that's especially true in the wintertime.
Oh.
You know, I've got heated bird baths that I put out typically, and you've not heard of that?
I've not heard of heated bird baths. California here.
I forgot.
I think we call that a bird jacuzzi then, isn't it? Sounds nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in the wintertime, we have like 2.5 months where it's just, below freezing. It's just everything's solid ice. So, selfishly, I'll put out a heated bird bath, and it is a very busy area. Let me just say, the key is really to just keep it clean. Wintertime is not as big of a deal as summertime. In summer when it gets hot, moisture accumulates and you can have mold growing in there, and bird feces, and you need to clean it. You really need to commit to cleaning not just the bird bath, but also the feeders on a pretty regular basis. But yeah, I think water is like one of the best ways, the best, easiest, and most natural way to attract the birds, and entertaining too. You get to watch them take a bath and splash around, and
and they use it to drink and also to bathe or cool off, or all three.
I think they do all three.
Okay.
Preening their feathers and keeping them clean is really important, and they don't take baths because they just want to splash around. They're actually getting down to business, and it's got an actual function.
Yeah. No, when I see them, I'm assuming that's what they're doing. And it doesn't seem like you need, like, for, certain, like for butterflies, they need a little bit of mud. And then for bees, you got to make sure that it's shallow so they don't drown. But they don't need running water per se, just fresh water. They'll just take, I've seen them go in fountains, but that's why bird baths are a thing. You could just put a little bit of water in there and then they'll just sort of splash around. So.
Right. Yeah. You bring up a good point, though. As far as the depth goes, birds typically, especially songbirds, they have short little legs generally, and if you have a bird bath that is more than, say 1.5 inches of water in it, then you're going to want to line it with rocks or something that's going to raise it up a little so that they have, varying levels of depth that they can splash around in. Because some species are going to, want the more shallow, and others are okay with the deeper.
Yeah.
But, if you don't have an attractive or an appealing source of water, they're just not going to come.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Getting back to their food, I see these projects that people make, and they use, I think, peanut butter, and then they stick all the seeds onto peanut butter. Is that good or bad? I mean, it's not even a nut, it's a legume. I can't imagine birds actually eat peanuts because they're underground legume. And there's a lot of sugar in it. Do the birds just ignore it and then they'll peck at the seeds? But is the peanut butter bad for them? I mean, like you said, you feed usually only things they're going to eat in wild. So it's like a fun project. It's like, oh, smear this with peanut butter and then birds will eat it. But I can't imagine that's great for them.
Well, there are a lot of birds that are natural peanut eaters.
Okay.
Woodpeckers love nuts, peanuts.
Okay.
And blue jays as well. In fact, they'll eat the whole shell. Well, they'll take the whole shell away from the feeder. But as far as peanut butter goes, they do eat that. They do enjoy it.
Okay.
But to your point, there's sugar in peanut butter. I just always advocate for just the closest to natural as possible. I've seen recipes also for suet is usually what they call it.
Yeah.
I've seen recipes that included like a big blob of Crisco, and
oh God,
I'm like, Crisco does not grow on trees.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's a good idea. I actually go to my butcher or my grocery store in the meat section and ask them for suet, which is literally the fat part of, the animal.
Oh, okay. I
And
was going to ask what suet is, and that's what it is. Okay.
that's technically what it is. I think a lot of people use it generically to mean,
Mhm.
something that woodpeckers will eat, or actually lots of birds will eat those nut seed peanut butter concoctions.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's not a pleasant smell to melt down suet, let me just
No,
tell
I
you.
can't
But
imagine.
but they love it, and it just it's just so much healthier for them.
Okay.
So that's what I do. I think if you choose like a natural peanut butter, which is, not going to be cheap,
Yeah. Yeah. And then what do you do
you
with
should
the
be okay.
suet? You mix it with the nuts and the seeds? Or
I'll mix some nuts in there
okay.
sometimes, or sometimes I'll just leave it as is, and
Oh,
I'll just, let it, get solid, if you
okay.
will, and then I'll store it in the refrigerator, and just chop it up and put it on like a platform feeder or something, or just, dip a pine cone in it as a way to kind of hold the suet for
Got
them.
it. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common to add peanut butter. I'll do that occasionally too, just if not for my own sake,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
suet melted and it just
Yeah.
looks gross.
And is this for the protein and fats, both of them? They need?
It's for the fats, especially in wintertime,
That's what I was going to
because
ask. Is that more important going into winter or during the winter or both?
both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah, especially for the ones that are going to stick around that don't migrate.
Uh-huh.
Especially in our parts here, they need the energy because it requires so much energy for them to just stay warm.
Yeah.
Just surviving, they're burning energy. So, yeah, I like to make that and put it out for them. You can also buy commercial versions of it as well. Those little squares of suet.
Mm-hmm.
And they make little cages that you can, hang from a
Oh,
tree.
yeah. I've seen those. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Birds love that.
What about fruit? Like if I have some fruit that are like, watermelon rinds and stuff, I'll put them out, by the natural bees we have in our hives, just because that's a water source and sort of a sugar source. Would they
Mhm.
come? I mean, is that like if you have an old part of a watermelon, could you put that out and will they go to that for sugar and water? Or
You could try it.
okay.
It certainly wouldn't hurt them.
Okay.
There's obviously, maybe not so obvious, but around here, people get really excited when they see orioles, beautiful orange birds, and they're notorious for liking fruit, especially oranges. I've actually seen hummingbirds, sipping nectar from oranges as well.
Yeah. Oh.
But grapes, grapes are great. A lot of birds will eat, like red grapes or green grapes. Most fruits, but I wouldn't put a banana out there.
Yeah. Not much
They
juice
probably
there. Yeah. Yeah. Not much
Yeah,
juice in
not a
there.
lot.
Yeah. And there's stories of them eating like birds. You hear stories every once in a while about, old berries on a tree that they fermented, and then you have drunk birds.
Oh yeah.
How common is
Yes.
that really?
Cedar waxwings. Well, waxwings only eat fruit. I mean, they do not eat seeds. I'm not sure about insects, to be honest. I would imagine they do eat insects, but in fall and winter, that's pretty much all there is available is the fruit for them.
Okay.
So yeah, as you had mentioned, it's the berries are fermenting and they're just chowing down big time. And if you go on YouTube, you'll see all sorts of videos of birds like falling out of the trees. Pretty entertaining, actually.
So it is a thing.
It's a thing, yeah.
It's a thing.
Mhm.
Okay. And it's not harmful, I
No, they'll
imagine. Unless they
little bird hangover,
yeah,
take
unless they
some.
fly into a window or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually they just pass out though, so it's all good.
Yeah. And when we were discussing what to talk with, lately it's come up with a lot of people, not a lot of people, but certain people I follow that, feral cats are absolutely horrible for birds. And I'm not disagreeing with that. My problem is I always say, what the heck do you want me to do? I will just give my statement is if you have right now I have 10 cats inside my house. one's just in from the heat. 3 are
Mhm.
kittens that I have isolated in a bathroom I'm getting fixed. And then I have the 6 that are inside. I don't want
Mhm.
all these cats, but they're inside. My husband's shaking his head. We can't have any more inside. My husband would move out. I might move out. We might just give the house to the cats. And then we live on in the middle of a walnut orchard, and these cats just show up. And this year has been absolutely horrendous. 3 moms with 3 litters of cats. And
Mhm.
when people say, "Oh, you're a crazy cat person," you fix and you spay and you feed these feral cats, you're contributing to the problem of cats killing birds. I guess my question is, I see it as I'm fixing them so there's not more. I'm catching the
Mhm.
kittens and giving them homes. But yeah, I'm going to feed the mommies and daddies that I fix, and hopefully they won't kill birds. Do they kill birds? I'm sure they do.
They do kill birds. As a matter of
Yes.
fact, it's one of the birds' top predators, especially songbirds, is domestic cats. But to your point, I mean, I'm a cat lover. We've always had cats in our family, and ours stay inside primarily.
Mhm.
But there are outdoor cats out there, and it's not their fault, right?
Yeah.
So I commend you for rounding them up and taking them in to get fixed, because that's really the only way to break that cycle. I mean, if there's people out there that have cats roaming their neighborhood, it is what it is. But I would suggest, perhaps not putting out a feeder or not going out of your way to attract additional birds to the yard, because they are susceptible, to
What about the
certain death.
What about a bell on a collar for a cat? Does that, that's why, because the cat's like trying to stalk a bird and then it just jingle jangles. You can't.
That's a great point.
You can't do that with, feral. If I could trap my feral cat, some of them let me touch them. I could. But if you're not going to keep them inside, you are allowing them outside. Of course, get them fixed. Don't let them outside. But maybe a collar with a bell. I don't know how. That's just maybe one way. And like you said, don't make a concerted effort to attract birds to your property if you're going to allow your cat to hang right outside by the window where the bird feeder's at.
Yeah. I mean, that's just an example of, backyard birding isn't for everyone. And by that, I mean, attracting more birds. You'd still be able to enjoy the birds that are already there. But I think someone that has a cat, cats roaming the neighborhood for whatever reason. And I also put in that category, people that are not willing to be responsible backyard birders, which means, not using pesticides and things to, try and get rid of the insects or, whatever plants in the grass, or also people that are not interested in keeping the feeders and bird baths clean, because, that's a problem too. The seed gets moldy, the feeder gets moldy, and that can make birds sick. So you're really doing them a disservice if you're not going to, watch out for them.
Yeah, good intentions sometimes go awry if you don't do the upkeep of it.
Right. So. And I really believe that people just don't know, and that's one of the things I'm trying to do is, just educating people, because they don't know.
Yeah. And speaking of that, your blog has a lot of articles on it, very interesting ones too. So what are some of your more, I guess would say, favorite articles that you like to write, or some of the questions you get, some of the more questions that you find people, or even like myths or things that you want to bang your head against the wall?
Well, we sort of touched on it before, and that was, what not to feed birds. And and I just think it's really funny that people want to feed wildlife human food. So I write about all sorts of different topics. How birds survive winter, and, different species have different ways of doing it. I also test out certain products because, I I just don't trust reviews
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
And so I will go ahead and buy up a bunch of stuff and test it out and see what I think works the best. But then one of my most popular category of articles is bird symbolism. I don't know if you saw any of those out there. But yeah, people are fascinated by that. It's, people want to associate some sort of meaning with seeing a certain species of bird, which is really cool. It's fun. It like keeps things interesting.
So each bird sort of has, like, if you see a bird, it sort of symbolizes something that's going on in your life. And
right, it can, or it has,
Okay.
historical meaning or cultural meaning from different groups. But then I also write and research on some pretty practical things, like, birds are hitting my window. What's going on? How can I stop it? So, that's some practical things that people can learn about.
Yeah. I have what I think might be maybe a myth. There might be some science in it. Is I grew up deathly afraid to touch bird feathers. My mom had it ingrained in us so much that birds were dirty, had lice, and we were not to pick up bird feathers. I think she did it because she just didn't want us to bring home bird feathers. So even to this day, when I see a beautiful bird feather, I don't even pick it up. And then when I see like my friends' kids with them, I literally, I don't know what my mom did to me. I really don't know. It literally is one of the things that have been ingrained in my head the most. And so are they dirty? Do they have lice? I mean, I'm going to make my mom.
They don't have lice. Okay. No, they don't have lice. I don't know if I would say that they're dirty, but, birds can carry diseases and you never know why that feather is there. More than likely, they're molting and it just naturally fell out. But that brings to mind a sort of a pet peeve of mine. I see people posting all the time of, look, here's this bird. It's in my hand. It's eating seed from my hand. And I just don't, first of all, I don't think you should get that close to wild animals. I think they really need to remain in the wild as much as possible, even though you're attracting them to your yard. But nah, I wouldn't say they're dirty.
Okay.
They could be carrying some sort of disease. You just never know.
Yeah, I think if you see a dead bird, you don't want to pick it up and be like, oh, look at it. Just like any dead animal you see, you don't want to pick it up because you don't know what it. Yeah. But no, I just had to say that. It's now when I say it, I'm like, God, it makes my mom sound incredibly neurotic. But knowing my mom, she just had an ulterior motive. Like she just didn't want to wash our clothes and to have to sort out all the bird feathers in it or something. I don't know.
Bird feathers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you have your pockets stuffed with bird feathers.
It's like the lint filter is just all bird feathers. And she's like, oh, I have to get another one again. In your blog, do you take all the pictures or are you a photographer as well of birds?
I am not a great photographer, but I try. Most of the photos, though, are from people I collaborate with on Facebook, a lot of wildlife photographers. And, I reach out, I find an amazing photo, and I'll reach out to them and ask if I can include it in an article, and I give them, photo credit for it. So, which I think is awesome. I really appreciate that I've never had anyone say no.
Yeah.
Pretty kind bunch. Yeah. But I'm also able to, provide really unique photos too.
Yeah. Do you travel to go? And is this the correct term, birding? And are you birders? What is the correct term?
Actually, there is a term or a definition of birding and bird watching, and they're actually slightly different. Bird watching is more the hobbyist type of, backyard bird watching. I tend to call it backyard birding just because it's, less syllables. But birding and birders are very serious about what they're doing. And they're typically out and about and going on, trips to other continents to find their lifer bird. And they're pretty serious. I'm not there yet. Okay. I don't know if I will be. But
I would say after 25 years, maybe you'll get there, but it sounds like you're pretty happy with your local birds.
yeah, they keep me plenty busy.
Yeah. I wish I knew anything about birds here in California because you're naming off all these birds. I'm like, I think we have Orioles, but I don't see them. I have, there's birds in theory, but unless you're really looking for them or possibly going out and looking for them, I sadly, so I just got to tell you, and this might, I wake up once a year to just shotguns and it's dove season. And it's so I'm like, I know not to go running in the orchard roads when it's dove season. But you hear it. I think the season's like maybe 3 days long. I think it was shortened this year because it was so warm. But yeah, we hear it and I'm like, oh, those poor doves. But I guess people eat dove meat. I don't guess.
Well, they look like they would have a good amount of meat on them.
Oh, see, I was thinking that's not enough for me at all. So,
well, I'm not saying like a chicken, but
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, poor doves. But yeah,
I think we have hunting season for doves here as well, or we have in the past.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Not a hunter.
Yeah. We have major wild turkeys on our property too. The city I live in is known for just the dumb turkeys who block traffic and stuff. So they're not the brightest birds, right? I mean, I know birds are, we're getting sort of off, but my friend had African gray parrots and I know they're one of the smartest animals out there. So birds, I mean, you hear bird brain, but for the most part, they're pretty smart and savvy to be able to survive.
Yeah, some of them are pretty smart. Crows are among the smartest species out there. And I know that scientists have actually been able to train them to memorize and repeat certain things.
That's
so
crazy.
I mean,
yeah. And I know, I mean, you hear the parrots, they speak, and then you have the ravens, and then you have birds of prey that you could train to go. And of course, pigeon carriers, you could train to go and fly. So they're, but then, the turkeys, I think, ruin it all. But
are they nice turkeys at least?
I mean, no, the ones in downtown have been known. Some of them have been known to attack people and they're big enough that you don't even want to risk it.
Right.
So the ones on our property tend to just run away when you get even close. But and then you see the numbers dwindle. Sadly, you could see like 25 babies, but we've got coyotes. So then you see that number dwindle. So
there's that circle of life you hate so much.
Exactly. I sort of hate it. So yeah, because when I'm going hiking, I see a lot of times the birders, and there's native plant people who, when they go out, their goal is like a checklist. They want to see one of everything in their lifetime, and I imagine that's how some of these birders are. They want to see one of everything. And, when I run by, I'm like, try to make as little noise as possible, but I'm sure they're annoyed by me and I'm probably scaring and I try to look around briefly, but it's a very patient person hobby. And I'm not that person. I remember I went to Costa Rica this past year and, the guides are they know people want to see wildlife, and I was more into the plants. So the guide was just chasing with the other guides, I can't even remember the bird, the very colorful bird of Costa Rica that everyone wants to see. And it was there. I saw it. But of course, you had to zoom in, telephoto lens. And I'm like, there it is. Yep.
I mean, sometimes I'm on a mission to take pictures of birds in my yard, so I'll sit there with my camera and I'll just sit on my patio and but then I forget about the camera. They'll come and go, and I'm just. Sometimes I just rather just enjoy them. I don't want to be hyper focused on pulling out the binoculars and because they can move so quickly. So
I think it would be fun to see interactions too. Not necessarily the predators taking the baby ones, but that would be horrible. But just seeing the interactions between them, how in their little baths and how they eat, and. I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to hit upon just sort of the basics. And you mentioned birdhouses, remove the hives. We talked about what to do in the garden, the food, but I know a big problem, and sometimes you see on YouTube the hilarious videos of the squirrel swinging and stuff. To keep your bird feeders from other predators, what are some, like squirrels and raccoons, what are some things that you do to prevent them from getting to them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't agree with inhumane ways of deterring squirrels or other varmints.
Good.
I have a bird feeder pole system set up, and it has a built-in what's called baffle, which essentially separates it. It hugs the pole and it separates the ground from the bird feed.
Okay.
The bird feeders and the seed and the food and whatnot. But it also, the baffle bobs. So if something, like a squirrel tries to jump on it, it'll bob around to the point where the squirrel's like, well, I'm not going to get anywhere. And it just gives up. As long as you have your bird feeder pole, 10, 12 feet away from the nearest tree, because squirrels jump.
Yeah.
Then the squirrels won't get at it. And, neither will raccoons or other, smaller mammals. If you have a bear problem, I don't recommend putting up a feeder.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I don't know how you would prevent that, but
yeah.
Yes, I have seen the feeders that you're referring to that as soon as the squirrel jumps onto it, it swings it around really quickly. And
that is a thing. That wasn't just some random thing. That is a system?
There is a commercial bird feeder out there.
Oh, God, that's horrible.
I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, it's awful. When I saw those videos, people are laughing, and I'm like, "That's awful."
I thought it was just like someone did something one-time thing. I didn't know that was a commercial one.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Isn't that awful?
That is. Yeah.
I'm not a fan.
No, I'm surprised that's even allowed. Because if that squirrel goes flying, it's going to get hurt.
Yeah, where's PETA?
Yeah, exactly. Seriously. Yeah, I would have a very expensive vet bill for a squirrel. And then I'd have a squirrel inside on crutches because, yeah. So you mentioned away from a tree, but of course that's any access point. People want to see them through their window, but you still don't want the feeder so close to your house that a squirrel gets on the roof and jumps, or a raccoon gets over there. So
right, exactly. Mm-hmm.
And you don't want them also eating, like you don't want rats coming because they're going to eat the seeds and nuts as well. And, so
I think if you have a, that sort of problem already, you might want to take care of that problem before you put feeders out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, and keeping the feeders in the area clean also goes a long way to deterring, rats and mice and things like that.
Yeah, stuff off of the ground too. If you're losing a lot of bird seed, like you said, you put the wrong feed in, and they just basically are kicking it out of the feeder to get to the good stuff. So I imagine you start figuring out what kind of feed you want. How often do you change the type of feed, or do you just stick to one sort of mix?
To be honest, I feed a lot more in the winter time because I feel like that's when food is most scarce.
Okay.
In the spring and summer, they're having babies and they're feeding their babies insects. So I tend to not do it so much in the summer.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love safflower seed. And one of the reasons is squirrels don't like safflower as much, so it doesn't even tempt them. But then also there's some other, non-native birds that some of us try to discourage from our yard, and they love the black oil sunflower seeds. So I use a lot of safflower, and then a lot of suet in the winter.
Okay.
And nuts. Yeah.
Okay. And just one last question, because every time you say something, my mind goes. So for any migratory birds, would feeding them sort of stop them migrating, or is the migration so ingrained in them? Or are we talking that songbirds for the most part don't migrate?
Some do, some do not.
Okay.
But I can tell you that by offering a feeder or
Mhm.
nectar for the hummers or whatever.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in them.
Okay.
They know when they need to leave
Got it.
to
Okay.
head south and to come back. So that's
Okay.
never a problem.
Got it. I just see myself going, if I've got a good thing here, there's food here. But then I guess the whole, hey, it's going to be really cold soon. Yeah, no, I know
Yeah.
it's instinctual. So I was just wondering that. I wasn't sure what, it sort of takes precedence. So, okay, that's good. I just figured that would be really difficult when you had some migratory birds, some not. You're trying to feed some, but if they're going to do their thing anyways, so that's good.
Yeah, that would be a disaster because you can't rely on people to take their feeders down at a certain time.
Yeah, I know that would be a big problem, and I guess we'd have a lot of more bird death than already. So your blog is on thefeeder.com. A lot of great articles there. What other places can people learn about birding, or do you have any sites? Or you said a Facebook group you're on.
Oh my gosh. All you have to do is go to Facebook and search wild birds, and you'll find hundreds of groups to join.
Yeah. And it's probably best to find a local one. I mean,
that's
be honest,
ideal.
if you're like, hey, I can't find this bird, someone's like, this is the birds of Wisconsin and you're in Oregon.
Right.
So,
I'll see that, people post birds in India. I'm like, oh my gosh, where was that one? I'm like, oh.
It's fun to see, but it's like if it's,
Yeah, I'll never see that in my yard. But one site that is excellent is, the Audubon Society, and they're at audubon.org.
Okay.
And the Cornell Lab of Ornithology they're excellent. So the specific URL that I go to is allaboutbirds.org.
Okay.
And they have all sorts of information about, birds in North America on that site.
Yeah, Cornell, even I know that Cornell is into birds. I don't know how I know that, but I must have Googled things and they must always pop up.
They're huge.
Yeah. Well, the plant world, they're big too. It's weird. It's bizarre that Cornell is, you don't think of, but really in the plant world and I guess in the bird world.
I thought it was a little interesting at first. Now it's just
that's
where
you go. I'll have all those in the show notes as well. And so hopefully people just your blog's open to anyone. Do you have your own Facebook or Instagram for it?
Not active.
Okay. You just like to write.
I just like to write.
You just like to write.
Someday I'll venture into that, but I don't want it to be a burden. You know what I mean?
A burden.
It's very time consuming.
A burden. Sorry.
Good one.
Sorry. Got to throw in one bird pun somewhere along there.
You've got to.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I learned a lot. So I think people are going to learn a lot. We sort of, clarified a few things and, people love birds. I always consider them like the flowers in the sky, just sort of like, I think like colorful tropical fish or the flowers in the sea, just, because they're beautiful and they're colorful. And I mean, some of these birds you're just like, that's not possible for a bird to have that many colors, but, or, to sound that beautiful or sometimes sound that annoying at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
We won't talk about those birds, though.
They run the gamut. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for joining me. And everyone, thanks for listening. And until next time, happy gardening.